Hey everyone, it's Lisa Sweeney here from Business in Heels, and thanks so much for joining us today for the Gender in the Workplace conversation on communication bias. So if you are a gender equity advocate or curious, you can't miss this conversation. Rarely discussed but powerful communication biases perpetuate gender inequality in many workplaces. For example, why is one person described as aggressive by some and assertive by others? And how do these biases actually impact their ability to deliver? We'll be discussing this topic amongst others with an aim to give you some tools and some ideas on how you can improve your workplace. So, to introduce briefly our panelists, we've got Chandell Labbozzetta, Mark Stickells, Ashley McGrath, and Ash Hunt. So let's start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're joining today's meeting. For me, it's the Wadawurrung people, and I'm sure for many of you it's different lands, and hopefully you know which ones they are. So on our behalf, I pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia, their connections to the land, sea and community. And I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and we extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So now to give you a little bit more of context on each person, I'm just going to whiz through each person's bio quickly so you know who's on the panel, and then we'll get stuck into the big meaty questions. So Chandell Labbozzetta is the CEO of LifePuzzle. Chandell is a gender equity advocate. She's passionate about the transformational leadership model that eliminates confusion, sustains momentum, and creates a more inclusive and productive environment for leaders and their teams. Her model empowers leaders to be confident and grow confidence, which leads to empowered decisions, wise choices, profitable interactions, all of which create great results, even in times of uncertainty and tumult. She's also a best-selling author, a master trainer of neuro-linguistic programming, a sales strategist, leadership specialist, and all-round confidence booster. So welcome, Chandell.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I thought we'd get you to quickly kick off and tell us why you're so passionate about gender equity.
Yeah, I think it's a very important topic, and as we know, there's lots of people who want to get involved but have a lot of trepidation around the subject, and so I'm super passionate, and I have a belief in the fact that people should feel safe to be able to fully step into their brilliance and to shine in any context, regardless of labels or what might be happening. And I think that in our society, we're experiencing that there's a fear of a lot of the biases that are coming up. And so we're not having powerful conversations. We're not having truthful and candid conversations. And so I'm really passionate about helping people get the tools that they need to have those collaborative conversations and to truly feel safe to be who they are and shine in their brilliance.
Awesome. And we're looking forward to a candid conversation today. Our next panelist is Mark Stickells, AM, and he's the CEO of Australia's Pawsey Supercomputing Research Centre, which apparently doesn't mean he's a computer nerd. Pawsey is critical national research infrastructure and hosts exascale class high-performing computers known as HPC system. Cetonics, the Southern Hemisphere's most powerful, energy-efficient research supercomputer. Pawsey is also Australia's HPC quantum computing research laboratory and a key partner in the Global Square Kilometre Array Observatory project. So welcome, Mark.
Hey, Lisa, and hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to support the conversation. You can see a supercomputer behind me, but it's the real thing, but it's not in my office at home where I'm sitting at the moment. So really, thank you for allowing me to join. While we've got great technology, I lead a wonderful team at Pawsey, and I've worked in science, technology, and sort of research-facing roles all of my career. I'm passionate about gender diversity, not because I just believe it's a fundamental right, but I also think it's a key to a successful, innovative business or enterprise. I've been in a sector, if you like, the research sector for over 30 years, and it's had lots of policies and initiatives that I can remember, and I've had some interesting experiences along the way. But now I'm in a senior role. I think my ability to act and to affect change has increased. And so I think it's important from a professional sort of capability. But frankly, I also think it's important to be a better man, to be a better father to my two sons, and to be a better colleague in many ways through this commitment and through the actions and efforts that I take. So, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. Our next panelist is Ash McGrath. She's a gender equity trailblazer on a mission to turn the dial in Western Australia. Ash leads CEOs for Gender Equity, a for-purpose organisation which seeks to accelerate gender equity by inspiring and supporting CEOs to take action. Ash is also working on a PhD project that will increase female inclusion and diversity in the Western Australian mining industry. So welcome, Ash. And as this is your day job, what attracted you to be involved?
Thanks a million, Lisa, and hello to everyone online. Really looking forward to getting stuck into the conversation today. What attracted me to the world of gender equity was actually being out in my previous role as a business development manager in the recruitment industry. And so that involves going out and talking with companies and saying, talk to me about talent, where are the gaps and where can we support you? And about 6 or 7 years ago, I noticed that there was a recurring theme in those conversations, which was, we really want to improve our representation of women, but we don't know how. We've tried this and that hasn't worked. So what attracted me to the industry was that there was a clear appetite and a genuine appetite for change, but what was missing was the how. So I think whenever you've got a genuine appetite, you can work with the rest. And so the work of my PhD and the work that we do at CEOs for Gender Equity is all about really just cutting out the noise and getting to the solutions and trying to inspire and influence action on those solutions.
Exciting stuff. And our final panelist, Ashley Hunt, is the Managing Director of Data Driven Insights. He's passionate about assisting both organisations and individuals to reach their full potential. He has a diverse work history across various industries. However, this passion has been a common denominator throughout. In 2010, Ash created Verizon, a boutique business offering premium specialised services aimed at creating optimal culture to drive high performance in partnering organisations. Ashley also then founded Data Drive Insights in 2019, a tech company which has built a dedicated team and the suite of specialised tools that provide a holistic approach on the organisational issues at hand. Having held senior leadership roles, including CEO of an SME, Ashley's unique experience partnering with senior leaders from a variety of industries to deliver cultural optimization programs sets him apart. So welcome, Ashley. You mentioned your passion, but share briefly your why.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and also full points for saying Verizon correctly. You're one of the few.
50-50, right?
Yeah. Yes, look, my why, it comes down to spending a couple of decades as a counsellor and family therapist and leading a team of lots of other psychologists and therapists. And it was also, we were an EAP, so an employee assistance provider, which meant we had thousands of people come through our organisation every year. And it was amazing how many times inequity in general and gender inequity creates significant harm for people, not just individuals, but for then their families and for society, and then also for the organisation. So we became very passionate about trying to not just treat, if you like, the individual situation, but rather look at it from a systemic perspective. And that's why we created Data Drive Insights. So we've collected, over 10,000 data sets now that enables us to create insights that we can share with everyone to help them actually work out what best practice is and then get after it. So as you said, both Lisa and Ash, that accelerating gender equity is what we're all passionate about. What we're interested in is measuring and really being able to quantify the fact that we're making inroads to that. I'm also the father of 5 kids, including 2 daughters that are sort of 21 and 19. And so supporting them through their experience of life and work and everything, it brings it home as well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. It's wonderful to have you all here. So now let's explore an example of communication bias. To set the scene, communication biases cover numerous different interactions that happen in business and society. These behaviours range from interruption patterns, speaking time, contributions in meetings, assumptions based on parental status, and encouragement bias, just to name a few. So what we plan to do is to discuss each scenario and explore different ways our panelists view this and maybe have ideas on how they could handle things. So let's start with interruption patterns. Ashley, could you describe a typical situation where you've seen this occurring and maybe explain a little bit about how it impacts the individual?
Yeah, sure. So predominantly in my role as an executive coach and doing group coaching, I'm facilitating conversations with groups, pretty much most of my day. And so this is something that's prevalent. And what happens is sometimes what also occurred before, as we were getting to know each other this morning, is even without in any ill intention, people can cut each other off and speak before people have finished their points. So I see that quite frequently. The impact often can go one of 2 ways. The person usually, most of the time, will feel their face drops and they disengage and they kind of lose their voice. Occasionally, if they're a bit fed up of being interrupted, it might go the other way and they may become a little bit bitey. In which case, what I then hear, without intervening, what I then hear is, gosh, she's a bit moody today, isn't she? Or something along those lines.
Yeah, some really great points there. So, Ash, can you explain why this behaviour is prevalent and what can be done to avoid it? Oh, you've muted yourself, I think.
Sorry, that's a $10 fine, isn't it? Before I get into answering the question, I just thought of another really public example of interruption bias. I was just reminded of it this morning. So I was watching a news conference by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and a lot of the male reporters were pushing and interrupting to get their questions heard. And I was getting ready for work and I just was happened to be listening to it. And Anthony Albanese actually said, "Excuse me, the next question is going to go to one of our female reporters because I'm conscious that I want to get gender balance in this conference." And I just thought, like, how good is that? Like, such a public, deliberate call out for it and a deliberate intervention to ensure that there was balance there. So look, in terms of what causes it, I'm going to talk broad generalizations here for the purpose of trying to give you a succinct answer. And I think the reality is that there's kind of nature and nurture, and generally females are wired differently, and men are wired differently. There's always exceptions to the rules, but there's a world-renowned gender communication expert called Deborah Tannen, and her kind of research and insight showed that men speak to determine and achieve power and status, and women talk to determine and achieve connection. And I think it goes way back to like childhood as well. So boys are encouraged to be loud and boisterous and things like that, and girls are kind of urged to be bit more like quiet and agreeable. So I think it's just there's a nature and nurture difference. I'm not saying that that's a justification, but you're asking me why it happens, and I believe that is a big part of it. And I think it's actually been proven. So there was a study by George Washington University which looked at interruption patterns, and they found that when men spoke to women, they interrupted 33% more than men speaking to other men. So I think that's the cause. I think part of the solution is having awareness and having conversations about that, and so bringing that to the forefront, so that men or women who are exceptions to the rules, who may demonstrate some of those characteristics, can just start trying to catch themselves on and be really deliberate and try and inspire and influence others about that awareness too.
Well, obviously, in your Albanese example, that awareness was very strong. That's great. So, Mark, in your opinion, why is this behaviour prevalent, and what can be done to avoid it?
Yeah, I reflected on this. So that I work in very highly technical environments and with colleagues with deep expertise, and I can generalize and say it's like a high IQ but a low EQ environment sometimes. So if any of my colleagues are watching, I might be upsetting some of them. We have about 60 people working at Pawsey. But in many of the situations I see, the sort of the lens and focus around knowledge and expertise sometimes overrides the human dynamics of meetings and engagement. And I sometimes joke we've got, 2 of these and 1 of these, and we tend not to use it in the same ratio because of the size of the brains of some of the people that I work with. There's that challenge in some of these things. My other observation is I do have perhaps more EQ than IQ in this space, and I have the literacy, not the expertise. It was sort of referenced in the introduction. And so when I'm hosting these meetings or seeing what's happening, I've got an additional responsibility to sort of manage that interaction or call it out. So to be prime ministerial might be, if that's a good call out, Ashley, that was really, really important. But the other challenge that I add to this is that in what we're doing right now, we're often involved in hybrid meetings. So there can be the meeting that's in the room, then there's the meeting that's in the chat that's happening, and that level of communication can also be disruptive and change the dynamics. And my analogy here, it's a bit like trying to eat an onion, and I'm not thinking of a former Prime Minister here either, but trying to eat an onion, lots of layers, and there's occasionally tears, right? It's a challenging thing because of the medium and the content in the industry that you're in now. I think there's extra layers of complexity to this.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you've highlighted that, because I think it's one thing to be in the room together, and then this hybrid world brings a lot more, and people are on their phone too. So we're in the meeting and we're on their phone, and Chandell, can you please share with us some of your ideas on how this can be avoided or dealt with?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that just referencing some of the things that our other amazing panelists have said, I think that we have situations that call for different ways to show up as well. So given the fact that there's complexity, there's different scenarios, and drawing on what Ash said around, the male-female connection, I think that sometimes we also have people who identify as different genders, or we sometimes have a female person presenting with a lot of masculine energy, or perhaps a male person presenting with a lot of feminine energy. So I don't think that there's a one size fits all, which is why it calls so much for conversation and collaboration. But in my opinion, the thing that can prevent this, or that can make the biggest difference around avoiding sticky situations that lead to emotionally charged experiences for people, is really about the power of framing and setting intention and asking good quality questions. I've seen situations sometimes where by actually framing, this is my best intention. I would love to be able to get your thoughts and ideas on this, and setting the parameter. This is the time that we've got allocated. Sometimes people rush and interrupt because they feel the pressure of time. So setting good framing for participants in meetings, but even just simply in the workplace when sharing ideas. I think that's such an important part of being able to creates safe spaces for people to be able to have the important conversations and the candid conversations. And the other thing around that too is just simply, asking permission or clarifying. Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing your point. I just want to check, have you said everything that you wanted to say before I jump in with my thoughts on the subject? So it's really just, human connection and recognizing the person. So I think we need to be situational, and different situations call for a different approach, but communication always wins the day.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of framing it up. Certainly, if people are dealing with multinational teams, it's really important to give those participants heads up on anything that you want input in, so they don't get surprised on the spot, because otherwise you may not get any input. Moving back to Ashley, how did you handle some of those situations that you'd come across, and what advice would you give to others?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think, as some of the other folks have said already, a key thing is getting agreement. So communication, which, when you sort of take that back to its origin, is around alignment and around communion. So sometimes just a simple team charter that's created by the team, which creates an agreement that you can stick, handy to where you meet and work. Because I think, as well as we're talking about, a lot of this is pre-conscious or unconscious behaviour and preconditioned. So it gives permission then, in a safe way, to just, if you want to use the phrase, call it out. So my view is to just bring it to people's awareness. So as Ash said, awareness raising is key, and doing that in a respectful way of like, oh, hold on a second there, Bill, I think Lisa hadn't quite finished her point. And then doing that a couple of times. And then, what I've noticed is the likes of Bill will say, geez, I just did it again. I can't believe I'm catching myself doing this. And vice versa. So I think they're the sort of really key things. Is it's creating a norm within the group and making it safe for people to actually work together in a way that enables everybody to fully show up and make their contribution.
Fabulous.
One last really quick point is a guy that I was coaching years and years ago, and he was a CEO of a local government. And he said to me, and he was very passionate about this particular area, and he said to me, Ash, if there's 10 instances within your executive team where this occurs, and 9 times out of 10 you intervene, the scoreboard reads -10.
Okay, I like it.
Because
all right.
Everybody sees the missed opportunity and then says, maybe we're not serious about actually having people have their own voice. And we read, our brains are more hardwired to look for distress than they are what we want. So we need to be actually vigilant, and 10 out of 10 times, if we can, we need to intervene.
Well, and I think without intervention, then there's tacit approval. And so bad behaviour just continues to roll on if everyone's sitting there not intervening. So let's consider our second scenario, which was speaking time in meetings. So we have covered a bit of this, but let's just extend it a little bit more. So Mark, can you share with us a situation that you witnessed and what impact it actually had on gender equity?
Thank you. Can I just give a quick shout out to Chandell for the point about the power of a good question? I mean, everyone thinks they need to have answers in meetings, but the power to frame that question can do so much to really set things in the right direction. So that's something I take to heart. I regularly have meetings and participate in meetings with, like I said, technical colleagues. And while there's a lot of assumptions about my own role and authority, they don't always fall evenly to my female colleagues. And I see instances where, like my senior platforms lead, who is a woman, is often the only woman in the room. She participates in a meeting, but there's also assumption, these are technical steering committees and those sorts of things. You see it happen that there's an assumption that because she's in the room. She's also the note taker, the caterer, and the tech support sort of troubleshooter, which genuinely impacts on her contribution to the meeting. Now, I'll call out Stacey. She is amazing. She's an engineer. She's got an impressive career in the resources industry before coming to Pawsey. She helped deliver this system and 13 other procurement projects through a pandemic, and yet it's expected to get the coffees and take the notes, and that impacts her ability to contribute to the meeting. And that gender bias typically falls, I see it happen again and again, it wouldn't fall on a male colleague. And it just is something that I see. I've generalised the situation rather than pointing to a specific one. And my last little plug, just to give a plug for someone else, and I don't want to make the tech space sound an awful space. They estimate more than 1.3 million jobs are needed in this space. We absolutely need more women in tech to make tech better, more human, more impactful. So I'll give a plug for Kate Kerwin, WA Young Australian of the Year, and the She Codes program, which is just awesome if you want to look into that as a national program. So there, over to you, Lisa.
Okay, well, given that we also run a leadership summit for women in tech and cyber, absolutely hear you, because it is one of the fastest growing areas. And actually, I think one of the issues is women underestimate that they don't need to be that techie to be actually in the industry. So amazing opportunities there. But back to your point about the gender equity and what impact it has. Chandell, can you share with us some ideas that you have on how this could be avoided or dealt with?
Yeah, and I won't answer too long, because I think part of my first answer around framing, and thanks, Mark, for the shout out on quality questions. I really do believe that the quality of our questions will determine the quality of our result. And so I think there's just one thing here around, the responsibility is twofold. I think our leaders have a responsibility to create safe spaces, and the people who are reporting to the leaders also have to take ownership and responsibility for actually having the conversation or clarifying and asking questions too. So in that example, if we're having a meeting to share ideas, we're mindful of time. You've just asked me a question. I have a lot of ideas. How much time can you give me to unpack that with you? And so that, again, reduces the confusion and gives people a framework that they can operate in. And as part of the quality questions piece, I think another area is to actually, as a leader, ask that quality question and say, look, this is my intention of how I'd love us to work together. Can you help me to understand how I can engage with you that you feel supported, challenged in a positive way to progress in your career? How would you like me to communicate with you that will make you feel the most comfortable that we can create these win-win outcomes together?
Yeah, great. So over to Ash. Can you share with us your thoughts on how we can actually avoid or deal with some of these situations?
Thanks, Lisa. I always try and have a real practical lens when I think of solutions. So this issue of maybe women not getting the appropriate speaking time naturally in meetings came up at one of our previous CEO summits at CEOs for Gender Equity. It was one which was all about inclusion. And there was a real call out from our members in the room that people who are responsible for chairing meetings should be sent on kind of specific training for how to effectively and fairly chair meetings. So, if there's, and I'm sure there are, courses out there to that effect, but, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of this is unconscious, but we can't keep relying on that, so what are we going to do about it? So looking at specific training for people who are responsible for chairing meetings, I think would be really beneficial. Just more broadly, training on effective communication for the broader workforce as well, so that, again, the benefits are that hopefully awareness of fair speaking opportunities in meetings, but just more broadly having better conversations with each other. I'm sure that and learnings can be brought out from outside the workplace and applied in home and society. So I think any training opportunity are based around effective and equitable communication would be super beneficial. And finally, if you're in a position where you know, it's a really, really it's a really big issue. And if these things aren't working, you could get really structural with it and actually build certain speaking times into the agenda. Just, it sounds like a bit like, you know, primary schoolish, but hey, if things aren't changing, that's a structural way to try and address it. And I heard about this example from Lend-Lease, where in their team meetings, apparently they actually build in time at the end to kind of say, right, did everyone feel kind of psychologically safe to make your contributions there? This is maybe another opportunity for you to kind of, and you could argue that some people mightn't feel safe to take that opportunity right there and then in the meeting. But I think the fact of actually, again, deliberately doing that and building that into the agenda, kind of the signal that that sends is pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's really great information. I know there was an app that was actually developed where people were tracking, one, the attendance in meetings as to how many women were going, and everybody in the meeting then got a question afterwards to comment on whether they felt heard. And so you got attendance and whether they were heard. And because they tracked it, the organisation went up in women's participation in all meetings, almost double what they were because of actually having the data. So back to Ashley's data-driven insights, which obviously is a key driver to helping us make change. So Ashley, can you share with us why why this behaviour is prevalent and what you think can be done about it?
Yeah, my personal view is that it's not always ill-intentioned. Occasionally it is. I think it can be well-intentioned because people could be really passionate about the topic, or they think they're right and they just want the team to do well and things like that. Sometimes it's, as Ash McGrath had said earlier, sometimes it's more of a personality issue and they're, you know, highly extroverted or something, and someone else is introverted. So there are a lot of reasons for why it occurs, and genetically and nature nurture, as Ash had said as well. I think that there's a danger in us thinking that it's ill-intentioned, because then we tend to intervene with in ways that don't actually help very, very much. So I personally like the goal is to raise awareness. So firstly, get an agreement through some sort of charter or something like that. So get an agreement from everyone, and then it's have everyone have permission to actually notice it. And then once we notice it, just gently mention it. And then sometimes, if needed, structure and process can be really helpful. So having people, you can go around the room. There's so many different things that you can do. It reminds me when you were saying, Ash, about Lend-Lease. I did about 5 years work with a large mining group over here in Western Australia with their executive team. And it was so rough at the start. They were just yelling over each other that we made this agreement, because they were very passionate. They really believed that they were right, and we made this agreement eventually that the second person couldn't speak until they reflected back the 2 or 3 points the first person had said. And it really, for the first couple of months, it did feel like, kindergarten or something. But the performance of that group after a few more months was incredible, because what I had noticed was that they'd be going, it's dark. The other one's going, no, it's nighttime, or something. I'm like, hang on, I think you guys are saying the same thing. It doesn't feel like it, but I think you are. So I think structure sometimes can really help.
Yeah, that's great advice there, Ashley. I think going back to Mark's original point, though, one of the things is that quite often when women are often selected out to do the note-taking and the tea and coffee, quite often they accept to do it. And I've heard from a number of women directly, they do it because they feel intimidated and they feel a bit like a victim. And a lot of them feel too powerless to speak out about it. in that particular situation. So I know in a number of board meetings, people have said that it happens. So part of the issue is getting back to having often the team. So trying to get the victim to be the person that actually stands up for themselves is actually quite challenging. It sort of really needs to fall back to the rest of the team. But Mark, in that situation, what actually happened, and what do you do to prevent it recurring?
Yeah, well, men need to step up and lean in to sort of do this. And I'm on the record of one of Ash's videos supporting CEOs for gender equity of saying, I can change the dynamic of a meeting by being the one that goes and gets the coffees for our guests, right? You're just that physical act where I'm going to clean up, make sure at the end of the meeting I'm cleaning up. It doesn't take 60 seconds to collect up a few things and take them to the kitchen and put them in the dishwasher, gentlemen, if you're on the line. Sorry, but I look, so those sorts of things are important. And if you're chairing that meeting, or if I'm participating in the meeting and have the actual influence of being a senior person, I can change the dynamic of a meeting by not letting it pass, or by calling it out and inviting another colleague to perhaps take on that role while my colleague Stacey is leading an activity. Because the point about the -10 actually is, like if I let those things go by, no matter the 9 things I've done before, those things we're still in deficit. So my general comment here, in reflecting, I think this lens on gender diversity makes for better meetings across the board. We've got a lot of cultural diversity at Pawsey. We've got a high level of neurodiversity at Pawsey, and also thinking of the physical considerations of how the room is organised. All those things can help manage some of the inherent biases that we have, some unconscious biases at times and unintended biases that we have. I'll say it here because I'm looking across, I'm the same height as Ashley, and but in person, I'm rather large. So I'm almost 6'5". So when people meet me, they go, "Oh, where I sit." And this just sounds. I mean, gentlemen, be aware when you sit somewhere in a meeting. If I am sitting next to a person and they can't see who's chairing, so I'm often sitting in a corner, because if I sit in a spot that blocks a colleague from participating, it can be very hard. So these seem silly things, but being aware of physical dimensions of the meetings, I think if I let those things go, as a leader, I'm condoning them. So there's lots of little things as well as the more deeper understanding the human dynamics. But some of the physical acts of just cleaning up and being conscious of who's sitting where and changing that up when it needs to happen can make a difference and give permission implicitly and explicitly to colleagues who feel that they might be being either intimidated or have not the support to act.
Fabulous, and so many great tips. I think at the end of this, Ash, you could actually put together the training course that you mentioned. So let's talk about assumptions based on parental status. There's many different ways this bias is delivered. So I'm just going to share a story with you of a friend of mine, and she was coming back to work, and the company went out of their way thinking that they were going to do a nice thing to sit down with her and say, we know you come back to work and your mother, and, we thought, given that you were going to do part-time work, that you might like to step down from the role that you had and take on this easier role. Now, throughout her parental leave, she'd actually completed an MBA. So not only was she more qualified than she'd left. And so she was totally pissed, absolutely annoyed that they hadn't recognised her extra skills and had no intention to use them, and were actually offering her a lesser role. So, I mean, as I said, this plays out today. That's probably not something you can legally do anyway, but it does tend to happen, and in lots of minor ways. So let's start with Ash. Do you want to comment on this and other situations that you're aware of that negatively impact gender equity?
Thanks, Lisa. And just before I respond to that question, I want to call out the app that you mentioned earlier, which actually measures gender balance and, psychological kind of, I guess, the inclusion of those people in the meetings is called Gender Fitness, and they're one of our toolkit partners. So highly encourage anyone on the call to look into that gender fitness app. It's very, very cool. So in response to your question, I've got a personal example to share from my previous employer, and it was, I was kind of trying to rack my brain to think about examples, because I've actually been very fortunate to work in very supportive organisations for gender equity and support for parents and carers. But this was one that stuck with me. I was in a business development position, and there was my organisation from Australia was running a sales sprint project in New Zealand, and I had just come back from parental leave, and I was kind of well regarded as one of the kind of top performing sales professionals, and I wasn't even asked to go. And so that will always kind of sit with me, because whilst I had just returned to the workforce and perhaps I wouldn't have gone, but the fact that I wasn't even asked definitely I'll never forget that feeling. So that's a personal example. In my kind of own network, just a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking with a fellow mother from my kid's school, who is actually the breadwinner in her household. So she, her husband kind of works part-time, and she's a very senior director in the government. And she shared an example of a similar example where there was a promotion opportunity which came up in her department, which would have involved a fair amount of travel. And she heard about it randomly after the fact, and again, wasn't even asked. And when she raised it with her leader, his response was, "Oh, well, I just thought because travel's involved and you've got young kids that you wouldn't be able to do it." And it's like, wow, and the impact, part of your question is what's the impact? And really the impact is missed opportunity, because little did they know she's the breadwinner in that household, and her husband could have definitely supported and facilitated that, but she wasn't even asked. And so that is the key. So the missed opportunity is all of the well-known opportunities which come with gender equity, which are, companies make more money, companies are more productive, companies attract more employees, they retain their employees are happier, their workplaces are physically and psychologically safe, they're more innovative, like you name it. So the impact of not including everyone and having bias when it comes to people's parental status is, quite frankly, you're missing out on all of the above.
Very succinctly put. I love it. Mark, what are your thoughts on this bias, and are you still seeing it today?
Well, I guess I'll start with a personal anecdote as well. This is going back to almost 25 years, but working in an organisation with great policies, a university, and wonderful childcare. But I was the childcare. I looked after the childcare because my wife had a senior job in banking and finance, and I was able to take advantage of the university support for childcare and for our first son. And I remember I wasn't able to go to the after 5 sort of monthly meetings with the university executive because of the that's when they had the sort of university business managers sort of meetings, and I pointed out that I wasn't able to attend because of childcare commitments, and they said, "Well, we thought you'd moved to being part-time." And I said, "No, I'm working full-time. I just couldn't do that." And this was like 25 years ago. Now I think, fast forward to Pawsey, we've more than tripled the number of women that we have working at Pawsey than when I started. We had more men named Mark than we had women at Pawsey in 2018. And so approaching about 30%. We've had several babies. Like, we've had a lot of babies in the organisation over the last few years. And in a positive sense, COVID helped, and hybrid work has helped a small generation of men understand what school pickups and daycare, and I'm going to embellish and say know how to use a washing machine and to perhaps accept grocery deliveries, or all of the things that were done over and above what women particularly took. So there's a group of my colleagues who I think have got a better appreciation about parenting responsibilities, and I think are then better people in the work sense. And I'll give a shout out to one of my colleagues, my executive officer, and then the opportunities here. We've recruited a couple of people from industry who've come back from maternity leave that wanted to work in an environment that was supportive, and we need smart tech savvy people and have supported environments. My executive officer's had 3 babies in the last 5 years, and I rewarded her productivity with a promotion late last year. So she's because she's amazing, and what that brings to the organisation is something really really positive. And all of the tick of Ashley's things that you see in terms of productivity, innovation, those things are real if you open your eyes to this. So I see some of the negatives, but I'm seeing lots of green shoots of positives if the organisations are engaging.
And actually, one of our winning organisation for the awards, they keep promoting people whilst on parental leave. So that's, to your point, really valuable.
We just hired a starter that was just, that was, dare I say, a pregnant starter. And she was almost about to say, I'm not expecting to get the job. And I'm like, no, you're amazing. We'll manage through that. And the commitment that you get from colleagues when you support them in this way is returned n-fold. It really is. Sorry, I interrupted you too then, Lisa. That's my bad.
No, that's a really important point. So for all the women out there who think, because I'm pregnant, I shouldn't apply, or I now should withdraw my application, please don't, because as you can hear, there's great organisations that want to work with you for the long haul, not for the short haul. So, yeah, that's a really valuable point, Mark. Over to you, Ashley. What are your thoughts on this bias, and are you still seeing it today?
Yeah, absolutely still seeing it. I think the rest of the panel have answered this really well. Unfortunately, what I hear very, very often is still things like, so off the record, we need to consider her age because she's likely to go on mat leave, in the next couple of years, and that's very disruptive. And so those conversations still occur a lot, especially around the selection of people to join the organisation, and probably also around promotion. So it's, I'm not sure if we should promote her. I mean, she's obviously the best person for the job, but I think she's getting close to going off on mat leave. I think she's getting close to having kids. That's something that is still talked about a lot. So whilst there's compliance, there's legislation and stuff around that, that's why they say off the record, but it's there's a lot of work to still be done, Lisa, in that space.
Any ideas, Ashley, on how you can reframe that discussion at all?
Yeah, absolutely. The way the rest of the panel have just said is with that thinking, we miss out. It's not just the potential candidate misses out. Everyone misses out. We've hired women who are like 20 weeks pregnant who were changing careers, coming into a coaching organisation from recruitment, and we're like, and she did the ICF accreditation, and we're like, and it's same as I think what you said, Mark. She was expecting to be told, "Oh, let's start after you've finished the mat leave and see how it goes and all that sort of stuff." And we're like, no, let's hit the ground running. You can. We worked together with her because we didn't want to assume anything either. So it's back to collaborating with her.
Yeah, great. Chandell, in your experience, how can leaders overcome this bias?
There's a chapter in my book called Assumption is the Mother of All Misunderstanding. So I'm a big advocate for not assuming in general. I think that there's too much assumption that goes on, hence my passion for quality questions. But I'd like to speak to the humanness, and I think it was Mark and Ashley. Actually, I think all of our panelists have mentioned the impact of technology and the fact that we still are ultimately human beings, and you know, bringing humanness to conversations and into our work environment. I think the standard of what you walk past is the standard of what you will accept. And so when we think about assumptions, there's a human condition where often we have a bias that we tend to think that everybody has the same values as us, or that everybody thinks the same way that we do. And that's an unconscious principle that, you know, it often takes people around you to point it out or to do a shout out on that, repetition of checking yourself and saying, you know, how did I perform there? Did I check off on these things? Because it's unconscious. You can't see your own golf swing. And so sometimes you can't see how you performed when you were wanting to avoid assumptions. So I think there's a couple of things I'd like to answer around how leaders can overcome this bias. And that is, first and foremost, have a methodology that you follow that interrupts the pattern that you're asking the questions of yourself so that you can ask them of other people. The second thing is to ask for feedback, because the people around you might see your actions and your behaviours that are unconscious, and they can help you point out the blind spots. And Carl Jung, who is the grandfather of behavioural psychology, said the things that are unconscious made conscious cease to exist. And then I suppose the final thing, I just do a quick story share on this. We had a very established and capable lady that we were coaching in one of our leadership programs, and went on mat leave. And as a result of second baby, or parental leave as a result of second baby, a big shift happened for this person. Nothing to do with the career or the organization, simply, hey, I'm a mum of two now, and I actually have different values, and some of the things that were important to me 5 years ago are a little bit different now. And we were having a very candid conversation. I said, and so what's stopping you from firstly defining this for yourself, so you know what it is that you need to ask for help and support with? And then secondly, what tools do you need to be able to have that conversation? Because the answer is not the individual making an assumption going, well, now I have to leave the organization, because this team member is extremely valued. And through that conversation, they actually worked out a different role that is more more along the lines of what she wants to champion, and also gives her the opportunity to progress her career and build the skills that she wants to. So I think any assumption, you know, leads to incorrect outcomes, and that's assumption on the part of our leaders, as well as assumption on the part of the people who are wanting to be supported. So let's ask those questions.
Absolutely. And I think you raise a good point about unconscious bias. For those of you who don't know, we run an unconscious bias weekly quiz so that everyone can keep working out what they're unconsciously biased about, because how would you know? So let's move on to our next topic, encouragement bias. This one's a little bit controversial. So one of the concerns that some men have raised with me is that if they seem to praise a female staff member too much, they're worried that that might be misconstrued as sexual harassment. So I might just start off with Mark, because I think you've got a strong point of view. Do you want to share that with us?
Well, yeah, I found this a really interesting one, because I work in an environment where positive feedback is kind of rare. It's a very technical, critical, sort of evidence-based sort of environment. But I found myself a little triggered by the question. I'm thinking, why would you think like that? I mean, we should be able to give positive feedback to a colleague without there being a sexual implication to this. So I had a reaction to saying, well, that male colleague should get some coaching and some support from either a supportive peer or from a professional. And then I found myself thinking of the reaction a little like our former Prime Minister, who had the Ask Jenny what to do type of situation. And so I'm thinking, really, you really have to think like that? So I found this quite a provocative topic to sort of cover, and seeking some advice, seeking some counsel would be really important for, dare I say, for the man.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us, Mark. Chandell, do you have a point of view about this and any ideas on how it can be handled?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting topic, this one, because when you put on the human hat and you start to look at it from different perspectives, you might be able to appreciate trepidation, fears that come up. There may have been incidents in the past that led them to, like, there might have been something that was misconstrued, and so there was a warning of some sort. So I think people's histories also speak to where this can become a problem. And I guess we also, it's a caution, this may be controversial for some listening. In my humble opinion, I believe that we need to be careful with extremes as well. So we might have one little situation with a lack of clarity, and suddenly we go to, oh, I'm not going to give any compliments on anything because that's the safest way to not get into trouble. Or worse than that, there are some examples where people have been inappropriate, or it is that they're doing inappropriate behavior in the workplace, and it's a standard that people walk past because they don't feel like they can change that in any way, shape or form. And so I draw on the work of Gary Chapman and his name's escaping me right now, the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. So Gary Chapman and help me out, Ashley. I'm sure you know. Well, it'll come to me, but so as not to take up too much time. I think one of the interesting things about their work was that they did worldwide global surveys and showed that most people leave the workplace that they're in, not because they weren't paid enough, not because they didn't get career opportunities, but mostly because they didn't feel seen, heard, and appreciated. And people have different ways of being appreciated, but what they established is that a big population actually has words of affirmation. And so I think it's important to be recognizing people for the contribution that they're making. And if you're concerned around sexual harassment, then make sure that we're keeping the affirmation to the work that they're doing, the contributions they're making, and bringing that back to those tangible results or the demonstrations of behavior that made an impact with the team or with the client or with the organization. But I think that human beings, as part of our makeup, we need a form of appreciation. And so without getting those compliments or that affirmation for the contributions we're making, we stand the risk of potentially losing really great quality people in our teams. And so, again, we just need to not make assumptions and seek clarity.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Chandell. Ashley, what are your thoughts on how we can improve this and what we can do to overcome it?
Yeah, I could speak about this topic for a good hour or so because it's, as you said, quite controversial. Had a lot of very interesting conversations with my wife, Abby, who's a master psych and one of the most incredibly passionate and committed people towards to creating high performance in people's lives. And we were shooting the breeze about this, and we're like, talking about things like I would find it really easy if one of my male colleagues is doing great to say, hey, bud, let's go and have a couple of beers after work, or I want to take you out for a beer or something like that, and just thank you for your work over the last month. It's been extraordinary. And she'd be like, yeah, that's cool. That's really easy. To do that with one of the women, female members of staff, it'd be a bit weird. Then for her, she's like, actually, that's the same with me. It's like, she named a couple of the guys. She goes, they're working incredibly hard. For me, with one of the girls here, yeah, easily take them for a couple of wines down at, one of the bars and just have a nice sort of time together. But I'd never do that with one of the guys. Right. So that's a little bit of an extreme example, but for both of us, it was a bit like, really? Wow. That's incredible that people of our kind of, experience and that we still would feel that way. So one of the things I want to just back up is Chandell's point is, yes, there's a huge amount of research on what you were saying, that Data Drives Insight has a 3-minute pulse survey that gets done monthly. And so you get to understand how a team is actually functioning around psychological safety and their performance and stuff like that. One of the things we've noticed over years is that being genuinely acknowledged and recognized for good work is a standout in helping people want to stay in that group and perform well. And the interesting thing is, it's the lowest indicator. So when we first heard that, which was probably a year ago or a year and a half ago, I'm like, wow, that's great, because surely that's an easy one to fix, right? But the deeper we dived into it, we found what we're talking about. There's a bias around it, and it's big. And people also have a real aversion to anything that could create conflict. And funny enough, praising people raises this red flag for us that they could deflect it, or they could, somehow get offended. Don't put me up on a pedestal, or, in front of the team again. And there's so many things that can occur. And it's only that 1 out of 10 negative experience that needs to happen before the person goes, you know what, I don't think I'm going to genuinely praise that. I'll just let it go. And then the whole team culture becomes that way as well. So it's actually a whole skill to teach people how. What Chandell was saying is to appropriately praise and recognize people for their good work. And it's a real skill to have people gracefully accept that and say thank you.
Fantastic. Gosh, you've opened up a whole lot of thought starters. Maybe we're going to have one whole webinar just on this topic, because I think it's really interesting. Trying to get that balance across. So for leaders to actually be very balanced and considered and consistent comes back to a lot of that. So Ash, what are your thoughts on how we can improve this in the workplace?
Thanks, Lisa. It sounds like this is definitely a bigger kind of opportunity than I realised. So it sounds like there's a gap for, again, some some really practical training on this, because again, same with gender equity more broadly, like the intention seems to be there, but it's the how. And if society's getting to a stage where we're holding back on giving praise, like I'm just not okay with that, and like Ashley said, the giving of praise is one of the key the key levers to retrain and engage your staff. So I think there's just a huge opportunity, and I think like a little bit of common sense as well, like on this, so with there'd be a simple way of making sure that you don't touch that person as part of the praise, or making sure that you just say, hey, you did a bloody good job on that, thank you so much. You can do kind of almost like uncontroversial language and a way of delivery, and if you just kind of maybe stick with that to start with. But I think we're maybe on to something that there's a bit of a session here which would benefit a lot of people by the sounds of it.
Well, what a fabulous discussion. For those of you who've been listening, you've learned a great deal about why communication bias continues in the workplace, and there's some simple roadmaps that you can implement. If you want to be recognised as a male ally and receive lots of information, we certainly have areas that you can check it out on Business in Heels. And as both Mark and Ashley have said, we need more men to step up to take a key part in this going forward. And now I want to give a huge thank you to our panellists, Chandell, Labbozzetta, Mark Stickells, Ashley McGrath and Ashley Hunt, for sharing their experiences and their ideas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.